Thank you very much for the opportunity, and it's really good to be here. And also earlier, it's very impressive to see how many there are of you this early in the morning. I'm sure the weather rules wherever you are is a bit cool. It's a wonderful invitation, and it's very interesting time, as some of you might have seen last week, where a whole lot of emails started coming through. It seemed like the whole of South Africa in some way woke up to what this is about. Um, some of the stuff that happened last week was quite interesting because it seemed to be very reactionary, as if somebody did something, and then because of that, a whole lot of other people then started trying to do the same thing. And I think that may be something we can touch on today, that, be very careful of that. Be very careful of doing reactionary things because someone just quickly does something via email, or someone phones you up and says, what are we doing about POPI? With anything, it's about a logical approach. And I saw last week a lot of very much gut feel, impulsive reactions. Let's quickly send out a mail here without really knowing why you were sending out that email. And I actually had a chat this weekend to a very big privacy consultant in South Africa, and she was appalled because she had spent so much time trying to tell people in the bigger corporates and the medium-sized companies what to do and how to do it. And it was all undone by one person or a couple of people sending out an email, which was done in such a strange way without really a purpose. But the one thing I like about it was raising the awareness of what this is. And let's talk about that, focus on that as we're talking about the slides, and how this can help you. And I think that's one of the messages that I think is a critical part, is it's going to be something you're going to have to do. It doesn't make you money directly necessarily, although for some of my clients it makes them a lot of money because it's in their best interest to look after their clients' information. And if you can make money out of this, it's actually an incredible benefit. And there are companies in South Africa doing business intelligence, doing information type services, even consulting, and even development type stuff to international companies that have jumped on this years ago already because it makes them money. And that's probably one of the best things about it, is it makes you money. But on the other side, if you don't take this seriously, then you will actually be forced out of business in some ways for some companies. You won't be able to enter into certain tenders. You won't be able to interact with big multinational companies because of the fact that you don't look after personal information. So there's a bit of a carrot and a stick here, but understand that that's what it is. And if you embrace it and you try and do it logically, you can actually get a lot of benefits out of this. And that's hopefully probably the overriding thing that I'll try and leave you with today in this session. Yeah, and let's just talk a little bit about personal information. So this is the easy part, but people still get it wrong. And there's actually a lot more to this than maybe you know. I've been running personal information courses and privacy courses for the last 10 years. And these things do change a bit because they add certain things to it. And then people only focus on a few items in here. And if you look here, you'll see some good examples of what is personal information. And the reason I like this is because it's not just the direct things. There's also what people can work out about you. There's also information about yourselves that you wouldn't think is that important in terms of, and you might not even know you're collecting, or if you're collecting, you might not think it's so important. Okay, so, but what the criminals do and that's really where a lot of the focus is on. The main two focuses really are on protecting, looking after people, protecting your right to privacy. And the second part is about against criminals, because the amount of cybercrime is increasing on a monthly basis. You might have seen this weekend, we had one of the biggest ransomware attacks ever, where they took down thousands of retail stores around the world, and they're talking about billions of dollars lost in income, and never mind the ransoms these guys are having to pay. And a lot of those things are caused partially by PR, or sometimes even fully by PR breaches, where they use the information, personal information, to be able to commit crimes. One of my favorite stories is about a house being stolen in Canada by somebody's identity being stolen, and somebody working out he could do everything online. The criminals worked out that they could buy a house, they could advertise the house, and they could sell the house, and they could enter into contracts with banks, lawyers, all these companies along the system electronically by stealing a pensioner's identity. It was somebody who didn't have much technical knowledge, didn't even really have a computer, and they took advantage of those weaknesses, and they stole his identity, literally sold the house from underneath him. He was a guy sitting in his house for 30 years. Next minute, a furniture truck pitches up at his house, where someone says, why are you still here? You sold your house. And he went, no, I haven't. And he had to go through an incredible long, you can imagine, legal process to try and get his house back. Okay, that's a very good practical example of how PR can be used, which affects all of us individually. Imagine if you wake up one day and your house is gone. What are you going to do? And the more electronic we become, the more we go out into the internet, the more the chances are of that happening. And that is why we need to do so much more in terms of the way we treat PR and the way we secure PR. Okay, we're going to talk about things like criminal records. Obviously, is a very important one. A lot of it is really out there. You know, people's criminal records are quite publicly open. But there's another aspect to that. If somebody is convicted, is not convicted of a crime, but accused of a crime, you actually have to deal with that information differently. Things like voting habits, you know, people, election frauds all over the world are caused by these things. How much money you make, your political, there's a lot of stuff in here which comes from a South African context, which I'll show you on the next slide, so this is directly from POPI in terms of the main things you must be worried about or be concerned about in terms of personal information. And in here, you'll see things like mental health, sexual orientation. So it's not just your name, your ID number. Medical information is critical, especially right now. We're talking about what's happening with COVID, what's happening with vaccinations, what's happening with any other type of condition, how that affects you. We have a due cause to look after people's medical information. Obviously, your money, the bad guys are trying to get your credit card numbers. They're trying to get into your bank accounts. They're trying to get into your identity and your names to try and actually steal directly or indirectly from yourselves. Your employment history. And then you can have a look at the stuff, the online type stuff, also accounts, emails, your physical address, where you're located, how they can use that information in order to steal from you, but also to, as I mentioned, influence, use information about you for another purpose. Biometrics is very interesting. So your fingerprints, your retinas, all that sort of stuff is all counts as being really, really important personal information. So you might have an access control system coming into the office. How are you protecting my biometric information? Is it stored on a PC with no no security literally on it, and anyone can go and get that biometric information at any time? Obviously, it's a different risk in terms of stealing from you directly, but you can use biometric information for other things to pretend that you are a person, especially in this day and age where biometrics has been used so much more. And the private and personal opinions are the one that we don't consider a lot. So when I have a personal opinion about something, that does count as personal information. Now, a lot of that gets out into public. And obviously, if I say something in a public forum, I lose a lot of my privacy. But if I express my personal opinion inside the office to somebody, and that information is leaked, or if I write something down and I've only shared it with a limited audience, that gets leaked, that counts as personal information. And that personal opinion, obviously, as you know, is a highly charged subject. If I've got a slightly right-wing opinion, or if I've got an opinion that's against the grace, against what most people think, that can come back and affect me. And you will be liable if that is leaked in the wrong way. Yeah, lots of stuff about opinions and things as well, which also adds to that. So the most important aspect of personal information that we advise clients on is special personal information. And that's really the stuff that needs to be protected more. So the stuff I showed you in the previous slide is you've got to go through processes in terms of consent potentially, if you are going to look after it, if you are going to store it, but at the very least you need to protect it. There's a lot of stuff about consent and about security that people will be telling you now, telling you that you must get consent about everything. The law actually isn't a consent-driven law. It's a law built on legal basis. So if you've got a legal basis, you've got a contract in place, you've got a specific need for it based on the type of work you do. Consent is an add-on in many cases, and also you don't have to retrospectively go back and get consent from all your clients already. You need to apply it from July the 1st. Use consent if you want to, but understand you don't have to always use consent. Consent is not something set in stone if there is a legal basis through contracts or other things as well. Okay, so understand that. But when you get special personal information, then consent becomes a lot more important. So anything about children, don't store anything about kids unless you've got a very specific reason. And that reason you can then get consent from the parents. For example, we've got a lot of clients where we go in and we actually try and work out what they've got on children. And a lot of people don't realize they've got children's information, but then they had a marketing campaign that they did to children, or they brought in kids for a specific thing, and they've got all this information about the children stored there without in an unstructured way or not really sure where it is. So be very aware that you need to do more about getting consent and about protecting special personal information. So if you've got any of this type of information, things about religion, the race, ethnic, and origin one is always an interesting one. Of course, you've got it for BE purposes, you've got it for other reasons, but the general information about race or ethnic, as soon as it's linked to something, needs to be protected. And there must be a legal basis. In that case, for the BE, you obviously do have it. For other reasons, I'd be very careful of using anything about race or ethnic origin for other reasons, trying to do marketing, those sort of things. This trade union, political, so anything about that. And then we spoke about the health or sex life, so the medical information beyond just quick medical stuff. And the Ledge Commission, which I spoke about earlier. Okay, so any of this information, put into a separate category. Look at how you are looking after it. Try and get rid of it if you don't need it directly. But then also make sure that you put strong security around it, and that you know where it is and what you've got on it. And we'll talk more about security just now. I am talking quite quickly, so I'll take a little breath. I can't see questions, but let me know if there are any questions. Let's jump into POPI, and then I'll have a look if you do have any specific things. But let's talk about what POPI is. So obviously, it stands for the Protection of Personal Information Act, and that's the aspect that you should focus on. It's about personal information. Okay, so personal information we showed you about earlier what that is. And for you as a company, it means that you've got specific rules around collecting, processing, storing, and sharing. So those are the four main aspects on the Act. And as a sort of like an introductory to yourself, you should go, okay, so what PR do I have? How do I collect it? How do I process it? How do I store it? And how do I share it? And it's a simple table. We've got this much employee information, we've got this much external, we've got this much customer information, and you categorize what you've got that can be seen as PR, back to what I showed you earlier, and then you look at how we collect, how we process, how we store, and how we share. And that's really the starting point for any one of you or any company that wants to start this journey. And you can imagine, I did work at a very big insurance company in 2009 already on POPI. And there they went through every business unit and they did a trace of where the PR was. And basically what happens is you get the spiderweb picture of personal information going across a company, being shared with business partners, being shared with third parties, coming in and out between clients. It's an incredible picture when you see it for the first time at a multinational type of insurance company. So a lot of effort was then done into looking at all of those areas, looking at the business processes, looking at the security of what we needed to do. For a smaller company, not as difficult, but a lot of you might be assuming things. You might think that, we don't actually collect personal information at all, or we only collect it for a small thing. And then you go and you have a look and you see what you're actually doing. And also you see where it's going, where it's been stored. Is it locally on people's hard drives? Is it in USB drives? Is it being emailed out? And then you've got a combination of changing processes, understanding what to do in order to. It's not only about security, it's far wider. It's a lot bigger in terms of processes. And that's the logical approach, is starting to look at your processes and how you're doing this. Okay, and that's what I mentioned earlier. The two things really is about protecting privacy, and privacy is a human right. So if we living in a society that looks after rights, we should be looking at privacy as one of the things. We should be protecting people's across the different types of rights, and the one is privacy. Now, privacy is a right which a lot of first world countries, are more concerned about necessarily than third world countries, which are more focused really on looking after people and doing more things about helping hunger and those sort of things. So, but we as a country, sort of in the middle in some ways, need to look at both, obviously. And if we want to do any sort of business with first world countries, if we want to be seen as a country that's on that right side of looking after human rights, then this is a very important thing for us to look at. So it's widely followed around the world. I've got a couple of pictures in other presentations where I'll show you all the privacy laws around the world. And if you look through Africa, you'll see that almost half of Africa has laws either signed or about to be signed largely because of dealings with the EU. If you want to deal with the European Union, whether you're a government, whether you're a company, these are the type of questions they ask you almost first on the list. How safe is it, and how do you protect our personal information? And so it's critical that this law is here in order to promote exchange business between us and other countries, and us and other companies. And so for myself, working in a small consultancy, I have a lot of pressure every time I deal with a company in the UK, a company in Europe, in order to show them what I'm doing in terms of my security and my privacy, which are two fundamental things that go together very closely. Okay, so if you don't do POPI, so here's the bad stuff, you must consider that you're going to get fined. And I think it's, when I use the word don't do POPI, I mean, it's obviously a bit of a blasé term to use it in that way. So if you have a breach, somebody breaks into you and steals personal information, somebody loses a laptop with a whole lot of PR on it, somebody prints out massive amounts of paper and doesn't shred it, and it gets thrown into a dustbin, and then a bad guy comes, someone sees it and takes it all out and shows it to the newspapers, or uses it for identity theft, you can be fined for breaches. And if you look there, they're talking about R1 million to 10 million rand, or 1 to 10 years in jail, and paying compensation to the data subject. So all the people whose information you lost, you'd have to pay them compensation. They would take you to court, and there are some really good cases in Europe where that's been happening with big breaches, where individuals take the companies to court and get some sort of compensation, or there's a deal was made. Now, those fines for a small company are obviously absolutely massive. The things are adjusted in terms of the size of the company. The between 1 and 10 million, I'm not sure that they'd fine a tiny company R1 million, but they would look specifically at what's happened and make calls based on that. You can go to jail, but generally the going to jail is the last thing. They will only put people in jail who are doing things in such almost a way where you're ignoring the rules and trying to go around it as much as possible. But the part that we as working with bigger companies are more worried about are these three things. if there is a breach and you're found to have a problem with compliance in terms of POPI, there is a massive reputation. It'll be in the newspapers. You will lose customers, maybe even employees, and from now on you'll be tainted. And this thing about getting new customers will be quite difficult. If you're on any one of the first 5 pages of a newspaper, you're on the internet on one of those my broadband top sites talking about a breach of POPI, and in that article it talks about you acting in a unreasonable or disregarding way, there is definite impact on your reputation. And there's some great case studies on companies that have had POPI breaches or privacy breaches, what happened to the share price, what happened to the reputation. And some of them don't exist. Some of them do recover. So realistically, a lot of them do recover because people forget. So you got to understand that something's going to happen to you, and then how well can you recover? How well can you manage the breach in terms of reputation? And can you come up again where people go, oh, yeah, that was a year ago, I've forgotten about that. Again, it's taking a chance to take that approach. So be very careful, but also understand that, everything's realistic. Not everything, the sky's not going to fall on your head tomorrow. Everything's going to change overnight. But you should be looking at this with the right ways. How do I protect people from harm? How do I improve my business through doing this? Those are the really good places to start in your head. How do I help? Because how would I want to protect my personal information? And what do I need to do in terms of improving? Okay, so if you do get breached, you need to inform the regulator. So the POPI has a specific function called the regulator. It's an advocate, Pansy, and she's been around quite a long time in quite a few different aspects of the legal basis, and she was made the regulator, I think, about 3 or 4 years ago now. And you are supposed to notify her office, but you also need to notify the data subject. So if you have a breach, somebody gets in, as I mentioned, either maliciously or someone makes a mistake and you email 1,000 personal information details to the wrong person, then the onus is on you to contact the person that you sent it to, and to apologize and to say, listen, there's been a breach, and we are doing investigations. So having some sort of breach notification letter is an important aspect of this. But also having a process in place to contact the regulator. But then, you're not going to do it if you lose one ID number by mistake. So you need to come up with a sort of a threshold based on risk of when you're going to inform. If you do lose one ID number, note it, record it, and then check, because if fraud does happen later because of that ID number or that credit card number you've lost, for example, then you may be in trouble. So record any losses and make a call, educated, logical call when you're going to report it to the regulator. So obviously the regulators, can't be informed about every single ID number, every single credit card. And obviously some people are going to take that approach. Some people are going to, okay, every time we lose one, we're going to tell it, and the regulator is going to be inundated with things, which is another issue in terms of capacity in this country, which I'm sure you understand has its limitations. Okay, so yeah, I do see. It's an interesting question, Harry. How does POPI affect people making false statements against a company business? There's the false statement stuff. I mean, there's a whole lot of other laws in terms of, dealing with that, in terms of reputation, and in terms of making statements about somebody, whether they're true or false, and how you do it. So it's libel and those sort of things. It's personal information is what POPI is about. So if somebody makes a statement against a company, and the statement includes something about personal information, especially personal information which shouldn't be out there, then there will be a repercussion in terms of that. But if I say that this company are doing things in an unethical way, that's not a PR specific related thing. Okay, it's more related to public pronouncements and libel and making statements which aren't factually correct. And there are a lot of those cases out there on the internet, aren't there, when people are saying things about people, sometimes wildly, because they've got the opportunity to do it on the internet. And if you look overseas, specifically in the UK, where a lot of laws have come out to try and stop the hate and the statements being made on social media, that's more about that aspect. And I know in South Africa, the Cybercrimes Act, which is another law coming into bill now, will put people in jail and will have crimes against people for doing some of the things like that. So the best place to look for that sort of stuff, Harry, is in the cybercrime bill. It's going to be an act probably in the next year, which talks about specific crimes. And in that act, it's got crimes about hacking, all the way through to identity theft, all the way through to things like hate crimes as well. And there again, there's a lot of gender-based violence online, crimes against companies, people trying racialism, all these things happening online, and that's where that act actually comes into it. But if privacy is involved in any way into what you do involved, then there is an implication there in terms of POPI. Okay, so direct marketing is a nice word. I think it's a good one for us to talk about. Are people gonna stop phoning you and trying to sell you cell phone contracts? Or people going to stop phoning you and trying to sell you car trackers? It's one of my personal favorites. I'm sure there's another couple in there that you get phoned about all the time. Now, the first thing about direct marketing is that direct marketing is a critical tool in a business. And when POPI was drawn up, obviously that was something that was taken into account. Okay, so direct marketing, cold calling, trying to persuade somebody while they're walking through a mall, trying to phone somebody up randomly, anonymously on a call. These are some of the oldest sales tools around and are critical for the sales industry. So they have not banned them. And I think if you go around the world, you'll find that generally direct marketing has not been banned. I'm not sure if it has been banned anywhere. However, it's more restrained now, more constrained. So generally, direct marketing must be more opt-in. I should be given permission to do direct marketing because I do business with a bank, and then I see a little tick box that says they will share the information with their service providers and do it for marketing purposes. I can then click that thing and go, no, I don't want to, or I can give consent. But if you phone me on a cold call and you're trying to sell me vacuum cleaners, you are allowed to do that. You are allowed to phone me and try and sell me vacuum cleaners, but you only know to phone me once. And during that time that you phone me, if I say, don't ever phone me again, or theoretically, if I don't give consent explicitly, then you shouldn't phone me again. Okay, and that's where a lot of, or on that call, the minute I tell you I do not give consent, go away and never phone me again, which I think many of us have done a few times before, then the person, they should take you off the list and they should never phone you again, which is something all of us have been talking about for years. So realistically, how are companies going to apply this? Are they actually going to apply it properly now that POPI's in here? If they don't, there will be implications. And I think that's probably the thing for all of us to consider. You will be able to report them to the regulator. If the regulator sees that one of these cell phone companies are getting thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of issues with them because everyone's complaining, then they will go to the big cell phone company and go, okay, guys, come on, this can't be, you can't be doing it like this. But if you do look at more of that information in the slide, it does try and constrain it by saying that we are doing direct marketing of similar goods or services. So a cell phone company trying to sell you life insurance, is that a similar goods or service? I'm not sure it is, but if they're trying to sell you data deals, laptops, any connected sort of value-added service, they are allowed to if you're an existing customer. But the minute they go out of that brief, then obviously there could be questions. Okay, or direct marketing communication. So those are the emails you're sending out to people, must contain the identity and must allow you to unsubscribe. Yeah, Anthony, that's a good question. You make me smile. So, I mean, a computer generated sales call is a way I think that people are almost trying to get around it, isn't it? And I think when you see the computer generated, if you listen to the whole thing, you'd find something there about unsubscribe probably at the end of the call. Going forward, they will have to include that on the call. But many of us are actually, we just put it down immediately, don't we? When you get the call, we go, computer, and then just put it down and don't listen to them. So I'm sure the effectiveness of those calls are shocking. It is definitely affected by it. It would be the same as an email. So if I do a computer generated phone call and I would need to have something in there to allow somebody to unsubscribe, I would ideally have to contact them before. Some of the guys are doing that already, where they send you an email or an SMS beforehand saying, we will contact you about this. Please let us know if it's okay. Or in the old way, it was like, please let us know if we shouldn't, and then say no. Now they want you to actually, you should actually consent before they do that. So it's definitely part of the brief, and I'm going to be interested to see how it's going to be affected. But according to the laws, you can't do it without consent, especially after the first call. Okay. The other one that comes up in all my courses is about, people taking your information when you walk into a complex, and then they force you to give them your ID or your traffic details, and then they store it. Again, it's an interesting one, and a lot of people are like, well, you can't do that anymore. Again, there's legal basis and there is consent, and both of those things need to be considered in that case. So you are doing it for what's perceived to be a legitimate reason to stop crime, to try and to try and protect people. But you can't force somebody to do it, but you can withdraw the right to that person to enter the complex by saying, well, but if the person doesn't feel comfortable, they don't have to give it to you, but then they're not going to be allowed into the building. So, and there are a lot of cases like that where you can say, I'm doing it for this reason. If you don't consent, it's a legitimate reason, then I'm not going to sell you this phone, or I'm not going to give you the right into this building. But the problem often about those is that they're not protecting our information very well, especially if it's on signed sheets. It's the worst thing possible. But again, it's also not so bad because it's not electronic. If your biometrics are in a system from 1975 and there's no controls around it, that's obviously also an issue. So aspects, everything that I'm telling you today, I think it's that take a breath, take a step back, think logically, don't panic. That's why I said to you, both those cases are things where it's not going to go away. This is here to try and make it better. Hopefully it's going to be it's going to make it better. But we also know that in South Africa, it's very difficult a lot of the time to actually, enforce laws, which is something people must also take into account. It's not going to be a regulator bouncing around at every company tomorrow, forcing you and telling you that you're doing wrong. But be aware of what it can be. Okay, so the last two, I just sort of put some stuff in to talk about where do we start and what you should be looking at. And I think that we've spoken about most of those things. So the first one is, what have I got, and do I have legitimate grounds for collecting and using personal data? So when I get someone's name, ID number, address, why have I got it? Do I have it because there is a regulation, a law which says I do need to have that information? Do I need it for a business process? Is it connected to what I'm doing? Or have I just got that information because it's the way we've always done things? Or we need the information, or we think we need the information, but we actually only need a certain amount of that information. And there are lots of cases I've seen on websites where they still ask for ID numbers and details. And then you say, why? No, because that's a way to verify a person. And we're like, but why do you need to verify the person for what you're doing here? So sometimes important, if it is important, then make sure that you then process it in the correct way, you look after it. And in some cases, you might need to get consent for it. Okay, so, and that's what this is: adequate and relevant information. Prevent any excessive, don't collect too much. So rather try and reduce what you're collecting. So yeah, you've got have grounds. Yeah, you've got make sure that you align it to what you're doing. Yeah, you've got make sure the way you collect it is right. But you also don't take too much. And I've got a lot of clients whose business processes have changed over the years, but they're still collecting the same information they were collecting 5-10 years ago, and they don't actually need a lot of that information. Okay, how long do you need to keep it for? And then what are you going to do with it after that time? And most laws in South Africa talk about a sort of a 3 and 10 year period, depending on what you're storing that information for. So in general, you should not have personal information for a client from more than 10 years ago who hasn't done business with you in the last 10 years, as a good example. If you've got an ongoing client's information, obviously that client is a long-term client, still needed, you've got a lawful basis. But if I bought a coffee mug from you 10 years ago, and I've never been back, you approached me and I never actually do any business with you, you should be looking at that and going, well, that purpose is long gone. The person doesn't do business with me. I should be destroying that information. And POPI talks about secure destruction of information. So don't just quickly delete it somewhere and then think it's gone. You need to make sure that you've actually got rid of it. And there are tools and mechanisms to securely destroy things. The best way, easiest way in many ways, is just to destroy a hard drive physically with a hammer, make sure that people can't get to that information. But the other ways is to use tools where they overwrite with zeros and ones the information. So think about how you destroy it, giving your staff a laptop that's sort of like was an old one without doing a secure destruction, and then he's got access to PR on that information. He gives it to his son starts playing, and then either a hacker breaks into it or his son releases it by mistake. So very, very careful of that aspect of it. Look after the rights, do things in the right way. Always consider them in everything you do. New projects, dealing with new clients, getting new information, make sure you're understanding the rights of individuals. And they're connected to that are the security controls we spoke about. So put in place security controls to protect it. And that means this is where, as I mentioned, security and privacy they literally tied together. So I need to protect my PR. I cannot have it stored on a local hard drive of a machine with no password on it anymore. I should have something like antivirus on those machines, but I should also ideally be encrypting the hard drive on that machine and protecting the access on that machine. The best way in many ways is not to store it locally, to rather have it in a secure 365 Google Drive, but it has proper access controls. That's the other problem. Sometimes we put it onto cloud drives and we have very weak security on those cloud drives. And just understand, when you move it out of the country, you must know that you've got to have some sort of consent, or you've got to securely control that. So wrapping it up on the last slide, here's what I thought, what are the main steps you should start? You don't have to read the Act. Hopefully you can do one of these sort of webinars where you get an understanding. But if you're a company which has a lot of PR, go and have a look at the Act, understand it. If you haven't got an information officer yet, go and appoint one and make sure that that person is aware of the roles and responsibilities and takes overall responsibility for POPI. Tell people, do awareness with your staff, tell them what the implications are, get people involved. It's one of get tone from the top, people at the top to buy in, and then go to your staff and tell them what they need to do. Go and find out what you've got, look at the risks of it. What POPI information do we have? Document it and look at the trail of where it comes from, where it goes to, and then have policies and a procedures manual that give you guidelines of what privacy is about and what you need to do. So that's really in that. One of the steps we do is go and change things in your employment contracts so that your staff are giving consent to what you're doing. But these procedures and processes then have different steps. They have more detail on exactly what you need to do.